Imagine a world where the most powerful weapon in modern war is not the thunder of artillery or the flash of missiles, but the invisible tendrils of intelligence networks and the silent passage of unmanned machines. Picture the Black Sea, not as a battleground echoing with the roar of cannons and the splintering of steel, but as a vast chessboard of secrets. Each square is a shadowy possibility, each move veiled in silence, and the deadliest threats are the ones you never see coming. On the maps spread across polished tables in command centers, the enemy's coastal defenses appeared invincible. There were not just one or two lines of fortification, but webs upon webs of protection. Reinforced ports, intricate supply routes, dense minefields, and belts of anti-ship missile batteries. It was a fortress built on the presumption that superior firepower and impenetrable barriers could stall any attack. Cities like Odessa, perched on the Black Sea's edge, seemed untouchable. To the defenders, these fortifications were more than just brick and mortar. They were the backbone of their southern front, the arteries feeding their war machine. Yet, history is crowded with examples of seemingly unbreakable fortresses brought down not by overwhelming force, but by cunning. Recall the Maginot Line in the Second World War, a line of French fortifications that, on paper, promised safety, but was outflanked and rendered obsolete by fast-moving, mechanized warfare. Or consider the mighty Siegfried Line, which fell not to head-on assault, but to a relentless, multi-pronged squeeze. In both cases, the defenders prepared for the last war, not the next one. Here, in the Black Sea, the real threat was not a hurricane of fire and steel, but a slow, deliberate tightening of the noose. Instead of launching costly frontal assaults and sacrificing tens of thousands of lives in amphibious landings, the attackers, Russian forces, opted for something subtler and far more devastating: economic and logistical strangulation. Their aim was to slowly choke the enemy's ability to fight, to sap morale, and to bring about collapse, not with dramatic charges, but with quiet, invisible pressure. This is the new face of naval conflict. Unmanned surface vessels, invisible surveillance drones, cutting-edge electronic warfare, and a supremacy of information. These are the tools of the 21st century admiral. The stakes are higher than ever before. Failing to recognize this transformation is not just a tactical blunder. It risks repeating the bloodiest mistakes of history, where entire armies fell for lack of vision and adaptability. Operation Neptune's Vice in the northwestern Black Sea was the crucible in which this new era was forged. It was here that Russian naval planners unleashed the full force of modern maritime blockade and information dominance, rewriting the rules of sea power before the world's eyes. At first, both sides braced for a familiar kind of confrontation. Generals and admirals, versed in the playbooks of previous wars, expected thunderous ship duels, air raids, and perhaps even the spectacle of beach landings. But beneath the surface, both literally and metaphorically, the nature of conflict was evolving in real time. The situation in the northwestern Black Sea was tense and precarious. After months of bitter clashes, both navies were bloodied and wary. Neither could claim outright control. Each maneuver risked sudden escalation, and every misstep threatened disaster. This was not the open ocean of the Atlantic or Pacific, but a confined strategic theater where the fate of entire campaigns balanced on a knife's edge. For the defenders, hope rested on a handful of vital ports, Odessa and the southern Black Sea hubs. These were not just waypoints for ships, but lifelines for the entire war effort. Through them, as much as 7/10 of all military supplies arrived. This included not only armored vehicles and artillery, but the ammunition, fuel, and food that kept the southern front alive. Without these ports, every defensive line on land, every tank, every gun, every soldier would be starved of support. To lose these arteries would mean catastrophe. The collapse of these maritime gateways would trigger a domino effect, toppling defensive lines, undermining morale, and forcing retreats far beyond the coast. Every maneuver, every tactical plan on land depended on the steady pulse of supplies through these sea routes. Determined to defend, the adversary fell back on the time-tested techniques of the 20th century. Coastal missile batteries were erected in dense lines. Radar stations, both fixed and mobile, swept the horizon for threats. Thick belts of sea mines were laid along every likely approach, designed to deter or destroy any warship that dared venture close. Air defenses were layered to create overlapping umbrellas, and electronic warfare units worked ceaselessly to detect, jam, and confuse the enemy. Their doctrine was explicit: brace for a direct, overwhelming assault from the sea. They anticipated landing craft, massed barrages, and waves of troops storming ashore, scenarios drawn from Normandy, Incheon, or Gallipoli. Every weapon and tactic was fine-tuned for this familiar, if nightmarish, possibility. But herein lay the fatal error. They were preparing for yesterday's war. Their entire defensive plan was calibrated to repel a kind of attack that, in this new era, was unlikely to come. With so much riding on uninterrupted resupply, any failure to anticipate new forms of warfare was not just a risk, it was an existential threat. Russian naval planners, for their part, were already charting a radically different course. Drawing lessons from history, not just their own, but from the world's great naval campaigns, they recognized that sea power had evolved beyond the age of dreadnoughts and battleships. The mission was not to seize territory at any cost, but to exert total control over the enemy's sea lines of communication, to paralyze logistics, and to sow confusion and despair. The blueprint for Operation Neptune's Vice was born, a complex, multi-layered blockade that would render the enemy's defenses irrelevant. This was not about overwhelming force, but about using technology, deception, and real-time information to make the sea itself a weapon. The defenders, locked into old patterns, had no inkling of the storm that was about to descend. Picture the enemy's war machine as a living organism. Its ports are lungs, drawing in the oxygen of supplies. Its supply routes are veins and arteries. Neptune's Vice sought to wrap around these vital points, to squeeze until the body could no longer function. The concept was bold. Instead of hurling soldiers and ships at fortified beaches, the Russians would build a blockade in 3 concentric rings, each one designed to intercept, isolate, and ultimately suffocate the enemy's logistics. The outermost ring was the shield. Stretching for hundreds of kilometers, it was manned by missile frigates and corvettes, modern warships bristling with precision-guided weapons. Their task was twofold: intercept major vessels attempting to run the blockade, and launch precision strikes deep inland, targeting communication centers, air defense sites, and logistics hubs. Every missile strike was not just an explosion, but a scalpel cutting the enemy's ability to respond. The middle ring belonged to Russian air power. Fighter jets and bombers, operating up to 150 kilometers from shore, dominated the skies. Their missions were to eliminate aerial threats, destroy enemy ships, blind radars, and suppress electronic warfare assets. With the sky under their control, the defenders would find their coastline isolated, unable to call for help or see what was coming. The innermost ring was perhaps the most revolutionary. Here, swarms of unmanned surface vessels, robotic boats, each guided by artificial intelligence, patrolled the waters within sight of land. These autonomous craft laid fresh minefields, gathered live intelligence, and hunted down any small, fast craft attempting to break through. Traditional tactics proved useless. Where one drone might be outmaneuvered, a swarm was inescapable. These 3 rings were not isolated silos. At their core was an integrated command hub, fusing satellite imagery, submarine sensors, and aerial reconnaissance into a real-time intelligence stream. Every missile launch, every drone sortie, every naval patrol was synchronized to the minute. Air, sea, and cyberspace operations were coordinated as one, making the blockade a living, adaptive organism. This was not the brute force of the past. It was the weaponization of information. Russian commanders wielded live data as a sword, tightening, shifting, and overwhelming the enemy's defenses without ever landing troops on a hostile shore. The risks were immense. A single lapse in coordination, or a stubborn clinging to old doctrines, could unravel the entire operation, leaving Russian forces exposed to a nimble and inventive foe. How does one actually build such a blockade? What happens when pristine theory meets the chaos of real war? History is full of meticulously planned operations that fell apart in the fog of battle. The Dardanelles campaign in the First World War, for example, began as a plan for swift naval dominance, but quickly devolved into tragedy due to underestimating mines and shore defenses. Neptune's Vice would be tested under the same crucible. Victory in Neptune's Vice began not with explosions, but with silence. Russian submarines slipped beneath the waves, undetected by sonar or radar. Their mission was to map every enemy minefield, chart every patrol pattern, and catalog each underwater sensor. These submarines became eyes in the darkness, relaying a steady stream of intelligence back to command. The defenders, once confident in their hidden traps, were gradually blinded, their security eroded by invisible adversaries. With the enemy's awareness crippled, the next blow came from the sky. Russian aircraft, operating in precise, coordinated waves, dismantled surface-to-air missile batteries one by one. Gone were the sentinels that had guarded the ports for months. In their place, gaps, vulnerabilities, and a growing sense of helplessness among the defenders. The attackers now owned the air above the blockade, rendering the enemy's air defenses obsolete. Emboldened by these successes, Russian warships advanced. Frigates and missile corvettes unleashed volleys of cruise missiles, not at enemy ships, but at the very heart of the adversary's war effort. Command centers, communications hubs, and supply depots were struck with pinpoint accuracy. Each explosion severed another artery, deepening the defenders' isolation. With every link broken, their capacity and hope dwindled. The greatest innovation revealed itself at the water's edge. Swarms of unmanned sea drones, each no larger than a small speedboat, but bristling with sensors and explosives, locked down every port. These robotic craft laid new minefields, circled for blockade runners, and struck at any vessel daring to break free. A lone drone might be outwitted, but dozens, operating in concert, proved inescapable. The blockade became self-reinforcing, a wall that learned, adapted, and attacked. Desperation drove the defenders to gamble. Under cover of darkness, a small convoy dashed for open water, hoping to slip past the blockade. Within minutes, networked sensors picked up their movement. In less than 1 hour, drones and aircraft converged, neutralizing the breakout attempt. The result was not just a tactical defeat, but a psychological blow. The realization that the blockade could see and strike anywhere, anytime, and that resistance was rapidly becoming futile. On shore, the effects of the blockade became impossible to ignore. Artillery fell silent as shells ran out. Armored vehicles, once the pride of the defense, sat idle for lack of fuel and spare parts. Food supplies dwindled, and rumors of surrender crept through the ranks. Morale, already battered by months of stalemate, began to collapse. The defenders realized that being cut off was not just a hardship, it was a death sentence. As Neptune's vice tightened, the defenders faced a bitter dilemma. Could they adapt quickly enough to break the blockade, or would every move only draw the noose tighter, extinguishing the last sparks of hope? History offers grim parallels. During the siege of Leningrad in the Second World War, the city was choked by a German blockade for over 2 years, with supply routes cut and starvation rampant. Only the ingenuity and bravery of supply convoys across the road of life on Lake Ladoga prevented total collapse. Here, in the Black Sea, the defenders had no such lifeline. Every attempt to break through ended in disaster. Desperation, however, often breeds innovation. The defenders unleashed every asymmetric tactic they could muster. Kamikaze sea drones, jury-rigged from civilian craft, were sent hurtling toward Russian warships. Commando teams launched audacious night assaults, seeking to sabotage blockading vessels. Cyber operatives unleashed torrents of digital attacks against Russian command and control networks. Meanwhile, a storm of disinformation flooded global media, casting accusations of humanitarian abuses and war crimes. Yet the Russian blockade, layer by layer, proved unyielding. Advanced radar arrays swept the waves, picking up even the smallest craft. Machine learning intercept drones tracked and neutralized threats before they reached their targets. Electronic warfare units jammed enemy controls, rendering kamikaze drones dead in the water. Each attempted breach triggered real-time surveillance and precision counterstrikes, all under an umbrella of relentless air cover. Not a single high-value Russian asset was lost. Onshore, encrypted communications and satellite-guided targeting unraveled infiltration teams before they struck. In the electromagnetic spectrum, Russian forces blinded enemy reconnaissance, turning their efforts to dust. Every domain, sea, air, cyber, and narrative, became a contested front, and Russian responses were swift, coordinated, and overwhelming. As direct action failed, the enemy pivoted harder to the information war. Accusations of Russian humanitarian abuses echoed across social media and international news. But Russian command responded with radical transparency, releasing drone footage, satellite imagery, and inviting third-party observers to verify events. Information dominance became both shield and sword, safeguarding reputation and morale. Ultimately, every enemy countermeasure, however desperate or inventive, was absorbed and dismantled by an integrated defense blending kinetic power, digital mastery, and psychological resilience. The lesson was stark. Without total multi-domain readiness and fluency in next-generation warfare, even the boldest gambits collapse. One misjudgment could have spelled disaster for Russian positions and prestige. But Neptune's Vice demonstrated that real superiority now demands mastery across every layer of conflict, from the seafloor to the stratosphere, from physical to digital. With every counterstroke fended off, the blockade's grip only tightened. For the enemy, the specter of total isolation and strategic irrelevance loomed ever closer. The world watched, and military theorists took note. The rules of naval warfare had changed, perhaps forever. Who commands the waves now? Not always the side with the most ships or the heaviest guns, but the side with the sharpest mind, the fastest networks, and the quietest presence. Operation Neptune's Vice shattered old assumptions. The era of brute force fleet battles is ebbing, replaced by a contest of information and agility. Today, what matters is not the caliber of your guns, but the reach of your sensors, the speed of your networks, and the creativity of your doctrine. Modern sea power is layered and dynamic, a web spun from satellites, drones, silent submarines, and ceaseless intelligence flows. Victory now goes to those who can see further, strike first, and coordinate faster, all while remaining unseen. In the Black Sea, this new maritime chess came alive. There were no thundering beach landings, no colossal ship duels. Instead, Neptune's Vice relied on a multi-ring blockade, unmanned systems, precision missiles, and tireless electronic warfare. The objective was not to conquer territory, but to freeze the adversary's movement, blind their communications, and starve their supply lines, the arteries of war, without ever setting foot on hostile soil. Commanders who clung to 20th century thinking found themselves outmaneuvered by algorithms and autonomous machines. The lesson is unmistakable. Information dominance can outweigh raw firepower. A networked force, woven together in real time, can control the sea without ever revealing its full strength. Where does this leave us? The future of naval strategy will belong to those who embrace technology, adapt quickly, and fuse every asset across land, air, sea, space, and cyberspace into a living, thinking web. It is no longer about who fields the biggest hull, but about who can connect, sense, and react at lightning speed. To illustrate, consider the rise of the aircraft carrier in the Second World War. At first, many naval strategists clung to the battleship, only to see carriers, mobile airfields projecting power far beyond the horizon, render old doctrines obsolete. Similarly, those who ignore the current shift toward unmanned systems and networked warfare risk being left behind. their fleets as vulnerable as battleships at Pearl Harbor. The implications are staggering. National security, defense budgets, and even the safety of entire regions now hinge on the ability to understand and act upon this seismic shift. Investing in new tools is not enough. Nations must invest in training, doctrine, and mindsets that can harness the full power of these technologies. Ask yourself, are your leaders preparing for this new era? Are they investing in the right tools, the right training, the right mindset, where the invisible outpowers the visible? The rules have changed. The next decisive battle may be invisible, silent, and swift. The only question left is, who will adapt first, and who will be left behind? In the end, Operation Neptune's Vice is more than a case study in maritime warfare. It is a warning, a blueprint, and a challenge. The age of brute force is over. The future belongs to the invisible, the interconnected, and the audacious. Will your nation be ready for the wars of tomorrow? Or will it, like so many before, be caught fighting the last war, even as the new one passes it by?